He told me at his company party that I should be grateful he even claimed me in public. I swallowed the insult that night, but I didn't forget it. Weeks later, I showed up on the arm of his director's son, treated with the respect I deserved. By Monday, HR wasn't questioning me, they were questioning him. The HR representative's voice on the phone was professional but uncomfortable. "Ms. Elena, I'm calling about the complaint Marcus Hawthorne filed against you. He's alleging harassment and manipulation." I almost laughed. 3 months ago, my ex-boyfriend publicly humiliated me at his company party, telling his coworkers I should be grateful. He even acknowledged our relationship. Now he was the one being investigated by HR, watching his career collapse and blaming me for consequences he'd brought on himself. I'm Elena, and I'm a freelance graphic designer who made one strategic decision after being disrespected. I refused to stay small. That choice led me to date his boss's son, attend the same company event on someone else's arm, and watch Marcus's world unravel in real time. Did I plan it? Maybe. Did I regret it? Not even a little. This is the story of how a single insulting comment transformed me from a woman who tolerated disrespect into someone who understood that the best revenge is simply choosing better and letting someone's own actions destroy them. It started at a winter gala where Marcus thought I was too insignificant to matter. But before I tell you about that night, you need to understand who I was before everything changed. You need to see the relationship I thought I was building so you understand exactly what shattered. I'm 31 years old, a freelance graphic designer and illustrator working from my small one-bedroom apartment that doubles as my creative studio. My space is organized chaos, dual monitors humming with design software, sketchbooks stacked on every surface, a wall covered in mood boards for current projects, half-finished coffee cups I forget about until evening. My days are spent creating book covers for independent publishers, branding materials for small businesses trying to stand out in crowded markets, and editorial illustrations for magazines that actually respect deadlines and pay on time. It's good work. Work I genuinely love. Work that pays well enough that I've never worried about making rent or second-guessed my decision to leave the corporate design agency I started at after college. I met Marcus Hawthorne nearly 2 years ago at a mutual friend's game night. He was the kind of charming that seems effortless, well-dressed in that deliberate casual way, articulate without being pretentious, quick with jokes that landed naturally. He worked as a project manager at Meridian Solutions, some mid-sized tech consulting firm downtown where everyone spoke in corporate buzzwords and measured success in quarterly projections. When he found out I was a designer, he leaned in with what felt like genuine fascination. Asked about my creative process, my favorite projects, whether I preferred digital work or traditional media. He made me feel like the decisions I made every day, color palettes, typography choices, compositional balance, actually mattered to someone outside my creative bubble. Our first few dates felt natural in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Dinners at neighborhood restaurants where he'd ask detailed questions about design philosophy, why certain color combinations evoked specific emotions, how I translated a book's narrative tone into visual language, what separated a good cover from a great one. We'd spend Sunday afternoons walking through art galleries, and he'd actually listen when I explained why a particular piece worked or failed, why negative space could be more powerful than the subject itself, why some artists understood emotional resonance while others just chased technical perfection. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely seen by someone outside the insular creative community I usually orbited. Marcus wasn't a designer or an artist, but he seemed to respect the craft, to understand that what I did required skill and vision and years of developed expertise. That validation felt important coming from someone in the traditional working world. The first year felt like building something real. Something that could last. Marcus would visit my apartment and watch me work, genuinely fascinated by the process of transforming rough sketches into polished final pieces. He'd take photos of my work-in-progress spreads and show them to his friends, talking about how talented I was with obvious pride in his voice. Around month 8, he commissioned me to create a series of city skyline illustrations for his apartment. Sleek, minimalist pieces capturing different neighborhoods at different times of day, playing with light and shadow and architectural detail. I spent weeks getting them exactly right, and when I delivered the finished work, he hung them in his living room with genuine pride. Every time someone visited, he'd point them out, explain the creative concept behind each piece, tell the story of how we'd met. We fell into comfortable routines that felt like the foundation of something lasting. Weekend brunches at the diner near my apartment where the waitress knew our orders. Movie nights with mock-serious debates about film choices. Exploring new restaurants and rating them on arbitrary scales we'd invented. Attending gallery openings together, his hand resting comfortably on my lower back as we moved through crowded rooms. I introduced him to my circle. Other designers, illustrators, a couple of writers and photographers who made up my creative community. He fit in easily, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely interested in their projects and challenges. But somewhere around month 14, hairline cracks started appearing. Subtle at first, so subtle I convinced myself I was imagining them. His questions about my work shifted from curious to corrective. Maybe I should focus exclusively on corporate clients. They paid better and offered more stability. Maybe I should consider getting a real job at an agency, something with benefits and a retirement plan and a clear advancement path. Maybe freelancing was too unpredictable, too risky for serious long-term planning. I brushed these comments aside initially. Told myself he was being practical, looking out for my future, trying to help me think strategically. My parents had valued stability. My father worked the same engineering job for 30 years. My mother taught at the same elementary school for 25. So part of me understood the instinct toward security. I assumed Marcus came from that same well-meaning place. I didn't recognize it as condescension disguised as concern. His comments became more frequent, more pointed. During dinner conversations, he started comparing me to his coworkers. People with titles like senior analyst and associate director, people climbing clearly defined corporate ladders with measurable metrics for advancement. Derek just got promoted to team lead, he'd mention, cutting into his food. That's the kind of trajectory that builds real wealth. Stock options, retirement accounts, the whole package. When I'd share news about landing a new client or completing a challenging project I was proud of, he'd nod absently and redirect the conversation back to his own work challenges, his frustrations with office politics, his strategies for the next promotion cycle. He stopped showing my artwork to visitors who came to his apartment. Stopped attending gallery openings with me, claiming work obligations that somehow never prevented him from going to happy hours with colleagues. When his friends asked what I did for work, his explanations became shorter, vaguer, almost apologetic. She does design work. Freelance stuff. The pride had evaporated entirely, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably close to embarrassment. Like my career was a quirky hobby he tolerated rather than legitimate work he respected. My best friend Sophie noticed the shift before I fully acknowledged it. We've known each other since college. Bonded freshman year over shared frustration with a design professor who thought modern meant everything should look like a 1960s Helvetica poster. She's a fellow freelancer who does branding work for startups, so she understands both the hustle and the deep satisfaction of building something independently. One Saturday over coffee at our usual spot, she watched me check my phone for the fourth time in 15 minutes, anxious about potentially missing a text from Marcus. "He's changing how you see yourself," she said carefully, not looking up from her latte. "You used to talk about your work with confidence. Now you apologize for it before anyone even asks." I immediately defended him. He was practical, career-focused, trying to help me think long-term. He cared about my future. "Elena," Sophie pressed, finally meeting my eyes, "you make more than most people with traditional office jobs. Your book covers win industry awards. You have clients who specifically request you because of your reputation. You're not the problem here. His attitude is the problem." But I wasn't ready to hear it. I'd invested nearly 2 years in this relationship. The good parts were still good enough that I convinced myself the rough patches were just normal relationship friction. Every couple had to navigate different perspectives on career and success, right? Every partnership required compromise and understanding. I told Sophie she was reading too much into things, that Marcus supported me in ways she didn't see, that I was fine. But even as I said it, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I'd started apologizing for my work before anyone criticized it. Started downplaying my accomplishments when people asked about projects. Started feeling vaguely ashamed when strangers at parties asked what I did for a living, like my answer would inevitably disappoint them. I didn't realize I'd already accepted Marcus's narrative, that my success didn't count because it didn't look like his version of success. That creative work was somehow less legitimate than corporate work. That independence and flexibility were character flaws rather than deliberate choices I'd made about the kind of life I wanted to build. And then came the winter gala. The company party where Marcus finally said out loud what he'd been communicating in 1,000 small ways for months. Where he stood in front of his coworkers and casually announced that I should be grateful he even claimed me in public. That night, everything I'd been ignoring crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. And I stopped being the woman who tolerated disrespect and started being someone else entirely. Someone who understood that the best response to being diminished wasn't anger or confrontation. It was strategic choice. It was refusing to stay small. It was building something better and letting Marcus watch from the outside as his own actions caught up with him. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. First, you need to understand exactly what happened at that party. The moment that changed everything. Marcus sent me the first text about the winter gala 3 weeks before the event. Company party December 15th. Black tie. You'll come, right? Not a question really, more of an assumption wrapped in casual phrasing. I'd replied yes without thinking much about it. Corporate events weren't my favorite way to spend a Saturday evening, but relationships required showing up for each other's professional worlds, even when those worlds felt foreign and slightly uncomfortable. What I didn't expect was the level of control that followed. 2 weeks before the party, Marcus started sending me links. Dresses from specific retailers. Nothing too artistic or unconventional, he noted. Elegant. Understated. Classic silhouettes in safe colors like black or navy or deep burgundy. I just want you to feel confident, he'd said when I asked why he was suddenly so invested in my wardrobe choices. These events can be intimidating if you're not used to them. The implication hung unspoken. I wasn't used to them. I didn't naturally belong in his corporate world. He suggested I get my hair done at a particular salon his colleague's wife used. Even offered to pay for it. They're really good with formal styles. You want to look polished, right? He asked what jewelry I planned to wear, whether my shoes were formal enough, if I'd considered getting a professional manicure. Each question came wrapped in concern, but underneath I felt something else. A sense that I was being prepared for inspection rather than invited as a partner. At the time, I interpreted it as nervousness. He wanted to make a good impression with his superiors, and by extension he wanted me to reflect well on him. That seemed reasonable, didn't it? Supporting your partner's professional image was part of being in a relationship. So I nodded along, accepted his suggestions with minimal pushback, told myself he was just trying to help. But I didn't follow all his advice. I wore a dress I already owned. A classic black sheath with subtle detailing at the neckline, expensive and elegant without trying too hard. I did my own hair in a simple updo that I'd perfected years ago for gallery openings and client meetings. I applied makeup with the same careful precision I used when working on detailed illustrations, understanding color theory and facial structure well enough that I didn't need professional help looking polished. When Marcus picked me up that evening, he looked me over with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not disappointment exactly, but something adjacent to it. You look nice, he said finally. Did you decide not to go to the salon? I told him I'd handled it myself. He nodded, said nothing more, but I caught him glancing at my hair twice during the drive downtown, like he was mentally comparing it to whatever vision he'd had in his head. The knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened with each passing block. The hotel ballroom was exactly what I'd expected. Corporate glamour designed to impress without intimidating. Crystal chandeliers, tables draped in white linens with strategic centerpieces, an open bar along one wall where clusters of well-dressed people gathered holding cocktails. Everyone wore expensive formal wear that looked nearly identical. The men in black suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The women in conservative dresses with strategic jewelry that signaled success without ostentation. Marcus disappeared within 5 minutes of our arrival. I need to say hello to James, he'd explained, referring to his boss. Network a little. You understand, right? Grab some wine, I'll find you in a bit. He kissed my cheek and vanished into the crowd before I could respond, leaving me standing near our assigned table with my small clutch and growing sense of displacement. I'm comfortable alone, so I didn't panic. I got wine from the bar, found our table, and settled into observation mode. People watching is a professional skill when you're a designer. Understanding body language, social dynamics, the unspoken hierarchies that govern how people interact. I watched who gravitated toward whom, who performed confidence versus who genuinely possessed it, which conversations were authentic and which were performative networking. My designer's eye cataloged details without conscious effort. The organizational chart displayed on screens in the lobby showing departmental structure and reporting relationships. Marcus's boss, James Brennan, a distinguished man in his late 50s with silver hair and authoritative presence, holding court near the bar surrounded by younger employees who laughed at everything he said. The company's social media handles printed on cocktail napkins and promotional materials scattered throughout the space. The subtle branding woven into every element of the event, color schemes, typography choices, the carefully curated aesthetic that screamed, successful tech consulting firm. I also noticed how Marcus moved through the room. Animated in a way I rarely saw at home, laughing loudly at jokes I couldn't hear, touching people's arms in that performative way insecure people used to signal belonging and familiarity. He looked comfortable here in a way he never looked in my creative circles. Like this was where he truly belonged and everything else was just killing time between professional obligations. About 90 minutes into the evening he finally returned to our table. But he didn't come alone. He brought his inner circle. The people I'd heard about in countless stories about office politics and professional maneuvering. Derek, mid-30s with a haircut that probably cost $200 and a handshake so aggressively firm it felt like a challenge. He embodied every toxic masculine corporate stereotype I'd ever encountered, the kind of guy who measured his worth by how much he could dominate conversations in physical space. Tanya, whose smile never quite reached her eyes, who had the calculating energy of someone constantly assessing social advantage and repositioning herself accordingly. Kevin, who seemed perpetually confused about why he was included in this particular group, a follower without conviction or independent thought. Rachel, who spoke exclusively in business jargon, every sentence peppered with words like synergy and optimization and strategic alignment. And Simone, who radiated former prom queen energy, the kind of woman who'd peaked in high school and spent the following decade building her identity around subtle methods of diminishing other women. Marcus introduced me as his girlfriend with casual brevity, and they offered polite but disinterested greetings before immediately returning to their conversation about quarterly performance metrics and upcoming project deadlines. I was clearly an afterthought, an accessory Marcus had brought to fulfill some social obligation but not someone worthy of sustained attention. Then Simone turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So what do you do, Elena?" The question came with that particular tone. Not genuine curiosity but pointed politeness designed to confirm pre-existing assumptions about social hierarchy and professional legitimacy. I explained what I did as straightforwardly as I could. Freelance graphic designer and illustrator. Book covers for independent publishers. Branding materials for small businesses. Editorial illustrations for magazines. I mentioned the industry award I'd recently won for a thriller series cover that had significantly boosted the author's sales. Kevin seemed genuinely interested. "Wait, have I seen your work? What titles?" I named a few and his face lit up with recognition. "No way. I read that series. That cover design was incredible. It's actually what made me pick up the first book." The validation felt good for about 3 seconds. Then Derek's eyes glazed over with barely concealed condescension. "Oh, so you're like, self-employed?" He said it the way someone might say, unemployed, or between opportunities. "That must be nice, setting your own hours and all that." The implication was clear. My work was a hobby, not a career. A lifestyle choice for someone without real ambition or professional drive. Tanya jumped in with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "That's such a brave choice, not having job security. I'd be absolutely terrified not knowing where my next paycheck was coming from." I opened my mouth to explain that I actually had more financial stability than most people with traditional jobs, that my client roster was consistent and well-paying, that I'd deliberately chosen independence over corporate constraints. But before I could speak, Marcus laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable deflection. A full, agreeable laugh that signaled complete alignment with his colleague's condescension. And then he said the words that ended our relationship. "Yeah, Elena's very independent. I think it's cute, honestly." He smiled warmly like he was about to pay me the highest compliment. I mean, she should be grateful I even claim her in public considering how different our professional worlds are. But I think it's important to be supportive of unconventional choices. His friends laughed. That casual, social chuckle of agreement that said they understood exactly what he meant and found his tolerance admirable. Simone nodded approvingly. Derek smirked. Tanya's calculating eyes flicked between Marcus and me, assessing the dynamic and filing it away for future use. I stood there holding my wine glass, face carefully neutral, while my brain processed what had just happened. Grateful I even claim her in public. Not that we had different career paths. Not that I was talented in a different field. Not that relationships involved respecting different definitions of success. But that I should be grateful, actively, humbly grateful, that he was willing to publicly acknowledge our relationship despite the embarrassing fact that I didn't fit into his corporate world. I was a charity case. A project that demonstrated his progressive open-mindedness. Proof that he was evolved enough to date someone beneath his professional status. The conversation moved on. Someone asked Marcus about an upcoming project deadline. The group laughed about some office drama I had no context for. They discussed weekend plans and made tentative arrangements for future social events. And I just stood there, smiled politely, and took a slow sip of wine while something inside me went completely cold and calculating. Marcus didn't notice. He kept talking, kept laughing, kept performing belonging for his corporate audience. Completely unaware that he'd just fundamentally altered the trajectory of his carefully constructed career in under 15 seconds. I stayed at that party another 90 minutes. Playing the role of supportive girlfriend with absolute precision. And the entire time my mind was working. I made polite small talk with a woman from Marcus's accounting department who'd wandered over to our table. Smiled at appropriate moments during conversations I barely processed. Laughed softly when the group shared some inside joke about a client presentation that had gone wrong. I touched Marcus's arm affectionately when he checked in briefly between networking sessions, asking if I needed anything if I was having a good time. I'm fine, I told him with a warm smile. Go do your thing. He kissed my temple and disappeared back into the crowd, completely satisfied that everything was normal. But inside, my mind had shifted into a different mode entirely. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been hot, reactive, visible. This was something colder. More calculated. My brain had started cataloging information with the same precision I used when analyzing design briefs from new clients, breaking down complex problems into manageable components and identifying strategic solutions. I watched James Brennan's body language when Marcus approached him near the bar. Noted the polite but slightly distant way James responded, the way his attention seemed divided, like Marcus was one of many employees seeking his validation that evening. I observed how Derek and Tanya exchanged quick glances when Marcus mentioned his latest project contribution, a flicker of something, amusement? Skepticism? Passing between them that Marcus seemed oblivious to. I studied the seating arrangements, recognizing the organizational hierarchy made visible through strategic table placements and proximity to senior leadership. My designer's brain couldn't help but analyze the entire event as a composition. Who held power, who performed belonging, who was genuinely respected versus who was tolerated. And I realized with crystalline clarity that Marcus occupied a more precarious position in this corporate ecosystem than he probably understood. We finally left around midnight. Marcus was euphoric during the drive back to his apartment, talking rapidly about how well the evening had gone. James had complimented his recent project deliverable. Derek and Tanya wanted to organize a couple's dinner. Kevin had mentioned Marcus's name when discussing potential candidates for an upcoming team lead position. Tonight was important, Marcus said, squeezing my hand. These events matter for visibility, you know? For career progression. I made appropriate sounds of agreement and support. When we reached his building, he invited me up with that particular tone that made his expectations clear. I declined gently, citing an early client call the next morning. A book publisher on the West Coast, 3-hour time difference, couldn't reschedule. He looked mildly disappointed but didn't push. Kissed me goodnight, told me he'd call tomorrow, disappeared into his building, still riding the high of his successful networking evening. I sat in my car for 15 minutes after he left, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The parking lot was quiet and dark. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, testing different interpretations, searching for ways I might have misunderstood or overreacted. But there was no ambiguity. She should be grateful I even claim her in public. He'd said it warmly with a smile, like he was sharing an endearing observation about our relationship dynamic. His friends had laughed in casual agreement. The tone, the phrasing, the comfortable cruelty of someone who genuinely believed I was lucky to be tolerated, it was all undeniable. I started the car and drove home. My apartment felt different when I walked in, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The design workspace I'd built with care and intention. The client work pinned to my inspiration boards. The bookshelf filled with design theory texts and art monographs. The framed book covers I'd created, including the award-winning thriller series that had led to 3 more contracts. This was my professional world. One I'd built independently, one that provided both creative fulfillment and financial stability. And Marcus saw it as something I should apologize for. Something that made me less than. I made tea I had no intention of drinking and opened my laptop. Meridian Solutions had a surprisingly comprehensive website. Staff directory with professional headshots and brief bios. Departmental organization charts showing reporting structures. Recent company news highlighting successful projects and client acquisitions. Employee spotlights that tracked career progression and promoted internal success stories. I found James Brennan's profile easily, VP of Operations with the company for 22 years, specializing in enterprise solutions and client relationship management. His bio included carefully curated personal details. Married 30 years to Patricia, 2 adult sons, passionate about classic film and independent cinema, volunteer board member for the local Film Preservation Society. I opened a new tab and started searching social media. Connor Brennan, the older son, was 34, married, living in Seattle, working in software development for a major tech company. His profiles were mostly private, showing only basic information and a profile picture of him and his wife on what looked like a hiking trip. No obvious connection to my situation. Ethan Brennan, the younger son, was 29, single according to his relationship status, working as a documentary filmmaker. His Instagram was public, clearly maintained as a professional portfolio as much as a personal account. I scrolled through his posts, absorbing details. Film festival attendance photos with thoughtful captions about documentary storytelling. Behind-the-scenes shots from projects he was developing. Hiking trips that showcased an eye for composition and natural beauty. Gallery openings and independent bookstore events. Quotes from filmmakers and writers he admired. Collaborative posts with other artists in the local creative community. He seemed genuine, thoughtful, artistic in a way that felt authentic rather than performative. Nothing like the corporate automatons I'd met at Marcus's party. And he was attractive in that understated way certain creative men are. Good bone structure, kind eyes, the kind of presence that suggested actual personality beneath the surface. 5 days earlier he'd posted about a weekend film workshop at the Downtown Arts Center. The post included specific details, dates, times, workshop focus on visual storytelling and documentary structure. He'd written, amazing workshop series on narrative film techniques. Open to anyone interested in storytelling craft. Would love to see some new faces there. DM me if you have questions. I stared at that post for a long time, my cursor hovering over the Arts Center's registration link. Was I seriously considering this? Attending a workshop for the deliberate purpose of engineering a meeting with my boyfriend's boss's son? It felt calculated. Manipulative. Like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But another voice in my head, quieter but insistent, asked a different question. Was it really manipulation if I was genuinely interested in the workshop content? If I legitimately wanted to learn about visual storytelling from a film perspective? If meeting Ethan was a possibility rather than a guarantee? And even if I did meet him, so what? I was allowed to expand my creative network. Allowed to attend public workshops. Allowed to meet new people who shared professional interests. I registered for the Saturday session at 2 a.m., then sat staring at the confirmation email in my inbox, unsure whether I'd just made a strategic decision or a self-destructive one. The next several days unfolded with eerie normalcy. Marcus texted good morning. Called during his lunch breaks to share mundane details about his workday. Made dinner plans for Thursday evening. Nothing in his behavior suggested he had any awareness that something fundamental had shifted between us. Thursday evening I went to his apartment as planned. He'd cooked pasta. Nothing fancy, just the reliable recipe he'd perfected over the years. We ate at his small dining table beneath my city skyline illustrations, and he was affectionate and attentive, asking about my week, listening to my descriptions of client projects with what seemed like genuine interest. But I felt completely detached, like I was watching our interaction from outside my own body. An actor performing the role of girlfriend, hitting all the right marks, saying the appropriate lines. He talked extensively about office politics. Derek had undermined him in a meeting with James, subtly taking credit for research Marcus had compiled. Tanya had positioned herself as the lead on a project they'd collaborated on equally. He needed to be more strategic about visibility and credit attribution. His plan for the next promotion cycle involved securing a high-profile client deliverable and making sure James understood his specific contributions. I made sympathetic sounds at appropriate intervals, offered vague supportive comments, but engaged minimally. He didn't notice. He never asked if anything was wrong, never picked up on my emotional distance, never questioned my unusually quiet demeanor. After dinner we watched a movie on his couch. He put his arm around me. I leaned into him with practiced ease. The physical routine of our relationship continued without interruption, but it felt hollow now, like going through choreography I'd memorized but no longer felt. Friday morning I left his apartment while he was in the shower, texted that I had back-to-back client deadlines all weekend, would check in next week. He responded with a thumbs up and a heart emoji. Sophie called Friday afternoon. "How are you?" she asked, and something in her tone told me she knew this wasn't a casual check-in. I told her everything. The party, the comment, the research, the workshop registration. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Then, what are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks I should just break up with him now and be done with it. But another part of me wants him to understand what he lost," Sophie finished. "Maybe. Or maybe I just want to prove to myself that I'm worth more than his condescending tolerance." "You already know you're worth more than that," Sophie said gently. "You don't need to prove it to anyone." "I know. But I think I need to do this anyway." Saturday morning I woke early, debated backing out of the workshop, then dressed in jeans and a comfortable sweater and drove to the arts center before I could talk myself out of it. The screening room was small and intimate, with about 20 participants scattered across tiered seating. Most looked to be in their 20s and 30s, dressed casually, notebooks and coffee cups in hand, clearly passionate about visual storytelling. I spotted Ethan immediately. He looked exactly like his photos but somehow more real, more present, physical in a way digital images could never quite capture. Faded film festival t-shirt, well-worn jeans, a notebook already filled with notes and observations. He was deep in animated conversation with another participant about documentary ethics, the responsibility of capturing truth without exploitation, the line between observation and intervention. The workshop itself was excellent. We analyzed film structure, discussed how visual language conveys emotion and meaning, deconstructed clips to understand the mechanics of storytelling through image and sound. The instructor was knowledgeable and engaging, and the discussion was thoughtful and substantive. During the mid-morning break, I found myself at the coffee station at the same time as Ethan. He smiled, friendly without agenda. "First time here?" I nodded. "Yeah. I'm a graphic designer. Thought it might be interesting to learn about visual storytelling from a film perspective." His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's such a smart crossover. The principles are surprisingly similar. Composition, pacing, emotional resonance." And just like that, we were talking. We talked for 20 minutes during that first coffee break. About the intersection of design and film, about how both mediums rely on visual composition to convey meaning and emotion. About the challenge of pacing, knowing when to linger on a moment and when to move forward, whether you're designing a book cover or editing a documentary sequence. About color theory and its emotional impact, how warm tones create intimacy while cool tones suggest distance or melancholy. Ethan asked thoughtful questions about my design process. How did I translate a book's narrative tone into a single static image? What made a cover successful beyond just aesthetic appeal? How did I balance the author's vision with commercial viability and my own artistic instincts? I found myself answering with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in months. No defensiveness, no apologizing for my career choices, no sense that I needed to justify why my work mattered. He listened with genuine interest, made connections to his own creative challenges, treated my expertise with respect. When the workshop resumed, we ended up sitting near each other. Occasionally we'd exchange observations about what the instructor was explaining, small comments about framing choices or narrative structure that showed we were processing the same material through slightly different creative lenses. It felt natural. Easy. Like talking to someone who spoke the same language even if our specific dialects differed. After the workshop ended around 4, a group of participants headed to a nearby coffee shop to continue the conversation. Ethan turned to me casually. "A few of us are grabbing coffee to keep talking about this stuff. Want to come?" No pressure. No expectation. Just an invitation to continue a conversation I was genuinely enjoying. "Sure," I said. The coffee shop was perfect. One of those independent places with mismatched furniture, local art covering exposed brick walls, the kind of space that valued substance over Instagram-worthy aesthetic performance. We claimed a large corner table, 7 of us total, and dove into deeper discussion about cinematography, narrative structure, the ethics of documentary filmmaking when capturing real people's lives. I mostly listened at first, absorbing the conversation, learning the dynamics of this particular creative community. But gradually I contributed observations about visual design principles that translated across mediums, about how book covers and film posters faced similar challenges in conveying complex narratives through single images. The group was welcoming, interested, treating my perspective as valuable rather than tangential. Nobody asked what my real job was or suggested that design work was somehow less legitimate than other creative fields. Around 6 people started leaving. Other obligations, dinner plans, prior commitments. Within 30 minutes, it was just me and Ethan still deep in conversation. He told me about growing up with a father who essentially lived at the office. How he'd watched his dad sacrifice personal relationships and creative interests for corporate advancement, and how that had shaped his own deliberate choice to pursue meaningful work over financial optimization. "I could have followed him into business," Ethan said, stirring the remains of his coffee. "He would have been thrilled. But I kept thinking, what's the point of building wealth if you never build anything you actually care about?" I understood that sentiment completely. Told him about leaving the corporate design agency where I'd started my career, where every project was filtered through marketing committee decisions and focus group data, where creativity was measured by how effectively it drove consumer behavior. "I make less money now than I would have if I'd stayed," I admitted. "But I actually care about the work I produce. That matters more to me than a bigger paycheck." He nodded emphatically. "Exactly. My dad doesn't get it. He respects what I do in theory, but I don't think he'll ever really understand why I chose this path." We talked about his current documentary project, a film about independent bookstores and the communities they create in an age of online retail dominance. He showed me some preliminary footage on his phone, beautiful shots of store owners arranging displays, customers browsing shelves with focused attention, reading groups gathering in cramped backrooms. His eye for capturing authentic moments was remarkable. Nothing felt staged or performed, just real human connection documented with care and respect. I told him about my favorite recent projects. A debut novel cover that had helped an unknown author land on several bestseller lists. A nonprofit branding package that had significantly increased their donor engagement. An editorial illustration series for a magazine exploring climate change that had won an industry award I was genuinely proud of. And through all of it, I never once felt like I was being evaluated or measured against some external standard of professional legitimacy. Ethan treated my work as exactly what it was: skilled creative labor that required expertise and vision. Around 7:30 he glanced at his phone and grimaced. "I hate to cut this short, but I have dinner plans with my parents. My mom's birthday." We gathered our things and walked out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street, that specific quality of light that exists only in late autumn. "This was really great," Ethan said, and I could tell he meant it. "I'd love to continue this conversation sometime. Maybe over dinner that's not a family obligation." I smiled, felt something lighten in my chest. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers right there on the sidewalk. He texted me immediately, just a simple wave emoji, and grinned. "So you can't claim you lost it." But then his expression shifted, became more serious. "I should probably mention something. I'm not really a casual dating person. If this is going somewhere, I'd want to know we're both interested in something real. I don't do the whole ambiguous situationship thing." I appreciated his directness. The complete lack of games or strategic ambiguity. I appreciate the honesty, I said carefully, choosing my words. I need to end something first. It's already over in my head, I just need to make it official. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. I understand. When you're ready, let me know. I'll be here. No pressure. No judgment. Just clear, honest communication about intentions and boundaries. I drove home feeling clearer than I had in months. Maybe years. Knowing exactly what I needed to do. That night I texted Marcus. We need to talk. Can I come by tomorrow evening? My phone rang within 30 seconds. His voice was tight with concern. What's wrong? Did something happen? Nothing's wrong, I said, keeping my tone calm and neutral. I just think we need to have a conversation in person. About what? Elena, you're kind of freaking me out here. Tomorrow evening. Can I come by around 7? He agreed, clearly anxious but trying to hide it. We ended the call and I sat with the decision I'd made, testing it for doubt or hesitation. But I felt only certainty. Sunday evening I drove to Marcus's apartment. He'd opened wine. A nice bottle, the kind he saved for special occasions, which told me he was trying to set a particular tone. He looked genuinely worried, kept running his hand through his hair in that nervous gesture I'd seen countless times before. We sat on his couch, beneath the city skyline illustrations I'd created for him back when I still believed we were building something that would last. I don't think this is working anymore, I said simply. His face registered genuine shock. What? Where is this coming from? Did I do something? I took a breath. Your company party. When you told your coworkers I should be grateful you even claim me in public. That comment showed me exactly how you see me, and I can't be in a relationship with someone who sees me that way. He blinked rapidly, his expression shifting from confusion to defensive recognition. Elena, that was a joke. You're being overly sensitive. I didn't mean anything by it. I don't think it was a joke. I think it's exactly how you view this relationship. And I can't be with someone who sees me as something to tolerate rather than someone to value. He started backpedaling immediately. I was misunderstanding the context. Taking one comment out of proportion. Being unfair. He thought the world of me. Valued my work. Supported my choices completely. But the words felt hollow now. Performance rather than truth. I'd heard months of subtle criticisms, watched him grow progressively embarrassed by my career, noticed how he'd stopped including me in his professional world except when absolutely necessary. Marcus, I said gently, you deserve someone who fits seamlessly into your world. Someone whose career makes sense to your colleagues. Someone you don't have to explain or justify or feel grateful for dating publicly. That's not me, and that's okay. We're just not compatible. He tried to argue more. Got emotional, his voice rising with frustration. Suggested couples therapy. Promised he'd change, be more supportive, never make another thoughtless comment. But I was already gone. Had been since that moment at the party when his casual cruelty crystallized everything I'd been trying to ignore. I wish you well, I said, standing. I hope your promotion comes through. I really do. But this is over. I left before he could mount another argument. The text started that night. Long apologetic messages sent at 2 a.m. promises to be more supportive and appreciative. Please for another chance. Accusations that I was throwing away 2 good years over a single comment taken out of context. I kept my responses brief and kind. I appreciate you reaching out, but my decision is final. I wish you the best. Clear boundaries. No anger. No drama. No openings for negotiation or extended debate. After about 10 days the messages finally stopped. Sophie called to check on me, her voice careful. How are you really doing? Honestly, I said. I feel relieved. Like I've been holding my breath for months and finally exhaled. There was a pause on her end. Then, are you going to tell me about the filmmaker? I smiled despite myself. Maybe. When there's something to tell. 2 days later I texted Ethan. Conversation's done. I'm officially single and ready to see where this goes if you still are. His response came within minutes. Absolutely. Dinner this weekend? That weekend Ethan and I met for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood I loved. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths, family recipes, and servers who actually remembered regular customers. Marcus had always dismissed this area as too residential, preferring downtown spots where he might run into colleagues or clients. We talked for 3 hours. Not about work, though that came up naturally in the flow of conversation. Mostly we talked about everything else. Childhood experiences that had shaped us, creative philosophies we'd developed over years of practice, what we wanted from life beyond career achievement and professional validation. Ethan told me about growing up watching his father disappear into work, how family dinners became rushed affairs between conference calls, how his mother had built her own life around his father's absence rather than confronting it. I decided early I didn't want that, he said, twirling pasta on his fork. I'd rather make less money and actually be present in my own life. I understood that on a fundamental level. Told him about the corporate agency job I'd left. The moment I'd realized I was spending 60 hours a week creating work I didn't care about for clients I'd never meet, all to build someone else's creative vision. Leaving was terrifying, I admitted. But staying felt like choosing to suffocate slowly. Over the next few weeks, coffee dates became dinners. Dinners became weekend hiking trips where we'd spend hours walking through forest trails, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in both conversation and silence. He showed me locations he was scouting for his documentary, explained what he looked for when capturing authentic moments on film. I shared my design process, showed him mood boards and rough sketches, explained how I translated abstract concepts into visual language. He introduced me to his filmmaker friends, a community of creative people who gathered for informal screenings and brutally honest feedback sessions. They were welcoming immediately, asked thoughtful questions about design work, wanted to know about the intersection of static and moving images. Nobody questioned my career choices or suggested I needed a more stable path. They just accepted that I was another person making meaningful creative work and invited me into their conversations as an equal. I introduced Ethan to Sophie and my designer colleagues at a gallery opening. Sophie pulled me aside after watching us together for half an hour. "He's good for you," she said simply. "You look lighter. More like yourself." He was right. I felt more like myself than I had in the entire 2 years with Marcus. A month into dating, we made it official. Ethan posted a photo of us at that gallery opening. Me standing in front of a piece I particularly loved, him beside me with his arm around my shoulders, both of us genuinely smiling. His caption was simple: "Lucky to have found someone who sees the world in pictures." The comments from his friends were warm and welcoming. No performative questions about what I did or how we'd met. Just genuine celebration of connection, people happy to see someone they cared about with someone who made him happy. 2 weeks later, Ethan invited me to Sunday dinner at his parents' house. "Fair warning," he said with a slight grimace as we drove to the suburbs. "My dad will probably dominate the conversation with work stuff. He can't help himself. It's like he doesn't know how to interact with people without defaulting to business topics. Just smile and nod. I'll rescue you if it gets unbearable." I was more nervous than I'd expected. Meeting parents always felt significant, but this carried extra weight I couldn't fully explain to Ethan. I'd seen his father at Marcus's company party, had researched his family online, had deliberately positioned myself to meet his son. Now I was walking into his home, sitting at his table, pretending this was all organic happenstance. James Brennan answered the door exactly as I remembered him from the party. Tall, distinguished, authoritative presence, but more relaxed now in casual weekend clothes. Jeans and a button-down shirt, no corporate armor, just a father greeting his son and meeting his son's new girlfriend. "You must be Elena," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Ethan's been talking about you nonstop. Come in, please." His wife Patricia appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, immediately warm and welcoming. "It's so nice to finally meet you. I hope you're hungry. I always make too much food." She offered me wine, asked about my drive, guided me into their comfortable living room while Ethan and his father talked about something related to a documentary Ethan was editing. The house was unpretentious. Lived-in furniture, family photos on the walls, shelves filled with books that looked actually read rather than decoratively arranged. Nothing like the calculated aesthetic of Marcus's apartment, where everything served a purpose in projecting a certain image. Dinner was homemade lasagna, fresh salad, warm bread. We sat around their dining table and the conversation flowed naturally. Patricia asked about my work and I explained the freelance design business without the defensive edge I'd developed with Marcus. She seemed genuinely interested, asked about my favorite projects, what drew me to book covers specifically. James leaned forward, curious. Do you have examples? I'd love to see your work. I pulled out my phone and showed him my portfolio. Recent book covers, the editorial illustration series that had won the award, branding work I was particularly proud of. He studied each piece carefully, asked thoughtful questions about translating narrative tone into visual composition, about the collaborative process with authors and publishers, about how I balanced creative vision with commercial viability. This is remarkable work, he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. Really impressive. Have you ever considered corporate branding? I imagine companies would pay well for this level of skill. It was the same suggestion Marcus had made 100 times, but the tone was completely different. Not condescending, not implying my current work was insufficient, just genuine curiosity about whether I'd explored other applications for my skills. I do some branding projects, I explained, but I prefer editorial and publishing work. There's something satisfying about helping an author's vision reach readers through visual design. James nodded, accepting my preference without pushing. That makes sense. Following your creative passion over chasing maximum income. That's actually something I admire. Wish I'd had that courage when I was younger. The conversation shifted as we cleared dishes. Patricia asked about Ethan's documentary project, and he showed them some rough footage on his laptop. Interviews with independent bookstore owners, beautiful shots of readers browsing shelves, community reading groups gathering in cramped spaces. James watched with obvious pride, despite what Ethan had said about him not fully understanding the creative path. This is really good work, son, he said quietly. You're capturing something important here. Then, as we were finishing dessert, James turned to Ethan almost casually. You know, you should bring Elena to our spring company event next month. It would be nice to have someone there who isn't obsessed with software optimization and quarterly projections. My heart rate spiked immediately, but I kept my expression neutral. Ethan glanced at me, reading my face for hesitation. Would you want to go? No pressure. These corporate things can be pretty boring. Lots of shop talk and forced networking. I felt the opportunity settling into place like a puzzle piece clicking into position. I'd be happy to go, I said calmly, as if it were just a casual social event. Sounds fun. Patricia smiled warmly. Wonderful. It's formal, so you'll have an excuse to get dressed up. And honestly, Ethan will be grateful to have someone to talk to who won't spend 3 hours discussing project management methodologies. We left around 9. During the drive back to my apartment, Ethan squeezed my hand. That went really well. My parents loved you. My dad especially. He never asks that many questions about someone's work unless he's genuinely interested. They're great, I said honestly. Really warm and welcoming. And you're okay with the company thing? You don't have to go if corporate events aren't your scene. No, I'm happy to go. It'll be nice to see you in that world. He smiled, raised my hand to kiss it briefly. Thank you. Makes it way more bearable having you there. I leaned back in my seat, watching streetlights pass through the window, feeling pieces fall into place. The next morning, Sophie came over for coffee. I could tell from her expression that she knew something significant had happened. So, she prompted. How was meeting the parents? I told her about the dinner, the easy conversation, James's genuine interest in my work. Then I mentioned the company event invitation. Sophie studied my face carefully, her expression knowing. You knew his dad worked at Marcus's company before you started dating Ethan, didn't you? I hesitated, then nodded. No point lying to my best friend. She was quiet for a moment, processing implications. Elena, I love you and I'm not judging. But I need to ask, are you doing this for revenge or because you actually care about Ethan? I'd asked myself the same question repeatedly over the past month. Both, I admitted. I genuinely care about him. He's kind and thoughtful and treats me with respect Marcus never showed. Our connection is real. But I'm also not going to pretend I didn't know attending that company event would send a very specific message. Sophie sighed, stirring her coffee slowly. Just be careful. Revenge has a way of complicating things even when the relationship is genuine. I know. But I'm not lying to him. I'm not manipulating him. We're building something real. The fact that it also positions me to face Marcus on equal ground, that's just a fortunate alignment of circumstances. Or deliberate planning, Sophie said gently. Maybe both can be true simultaneously, I countered. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe they can. Just promise me you'll be honest with yourself about what you're doing and why. I promise. 6 weeks stretched ahead before the spring gala. 6 weeks to build something real with Ethan while knowing exactly where it was leading. 6 weeks to prepare for the moment when Marcus would see me walk into his company event on someone else's arm. Someone whose father had direct influence over his career trajectory. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear, focused, ready. Those 6 weeks passed both quickly and slowly. Quickly because Ethan and I fell into an easy rhythm. Weekends working side by side on our respective projects, his documentary editing and my design work occupying the same shared space in comfortable parallel focus. We'd attend film screenings and gallery openings together, building the kind of partnership where silence felt natural rather than tense, where we could exist in the same room without constant conversation or performance. But slowly because I felt the spring gala approaching like a storm on the horizon. Inevitable. Potentially destructive. Impossible to avoid. 3 days before the event, I called Sophie, pacing my apartment with nervous energy I couldn't shake. Maybe I should tell Ethan I'm not feeling well. Skip the whole thing. This feels wrong, using a good relationship as some kind of weapon. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Elena, let me ask you something. Are you happy with Ethan? Yes. Genuinely happy. Does he treat you with respect? Completely. Then you're not using him. You're in a real relationship with someone who values you, and you're attending a work event at his father's invitation. If your ex happens to work at the same company, that's his problem to manage, not yours. You're allowed to move on. You're allowed to be happy. And honestly, Marcus deserves to see that you're with someone who values you. Maybe it'll teach him something about how to treat people. Her words steadied me, but the anxiety didn't fully disappear. I bought a dress specifically for the occasion. Deep blue, sophisticated without being overly formal, the kind of outfit that commanded attention through elegance rather than flash. The night of the event, standing in front of my bathroom mirror applying final touches to my makeup, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Stronger. Clearer. More like the woman I'd been before Marcus had slowly convinced me to shrink. Ethan picked me up at 7. When I opened the door, his face lit up with genuine appreciation. You look incredible, he said, and I could tell he meant it without any agenda or sense of ownership, just honest admiration. You clean up pretty well yourself, I said, adjusting his tie slightly. We drove to the hotel and I felt my stomach tighten as we approached the same venue where Marcus had publicly humiliated me 3 months earlier. Same building, same grand entrance, same hotel staff checking names at the door. But everything else felt different because I was different. The ballroom was decorated in spring colors now, soft greens and pale yellows replacing the winter whites and silvers. Different lighting, different floral arrangements, but the same corporate energy humming through conversations and carefully orchestrated networking. James and Patricia greeted us near the entrance. James's face brightened when he saw us. Elena, so glad you could make it. Ethan, your mother and I are sitting at table 12 if you need to escape the corporate talk at any point. Patricia hugged me warmly. You look beautiful. That color is perfect on you. James immediately began introducing us to colleagues as we moved through the room. This is my son Ethan, he's a documentary filmmaker, and his girlfriend Elena, who's a graphic designer. Incredibly talented work. He said it with genuine pride, not as an afterthought or qualification, just straightforward introduction. People asked about my work with actual interest. A senior director mentioned she'd seen one of my book covers and loved the design. A woman running a tech startup asked for my card, wanted to discuss branding for her company. A marketing manager asked thoughtful questions about visual storytelling and how design principles translated across different media. I felt valued, respected, seen as a professional with legitimate expertise worth engaging. Ethan stayed close, his hand resting comfortably on my lower back as we moved through conversations. When introducing me, he never qualified or apologized, just said simply, "This is Elena, my girlfriend. She's an incredibly talented designer." No hedging, no suggestion that my career required explanation. Just straightforward pride in my work. We'd been there about 40 minutes when I saw him. Marcus was standing near the bar with Derek and Tanya, all three holding drinks, dressed in expensive suits that looked nearly identical to what they'd worn at the winter gala. He was mid-conversation, laughing at something Derek had said, completely unaware that his world was about to tilt sideways. Then his eyes drifted across the room and landed on me. I watched his expression shift in real time. Confusion first. Why was I here? Recognition next. That's definitely Elena. Then shock as he registered that I wasn't alone, that I was standing with someone, that my hand was linked with a man he didn't recognize. And finally, anger, hot and immediate, as he began processing the implications. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. I smiled slightly, politely, the way you would acknowledge any acquaintance. Then I deliberately turned back to my conversation with one of James's colleagues, a woman named Michelle who was asking about my approach to editorial illustration. But I could feel Marcus watching us. Could sense him trying to figure out who I was with, why I was at his company event, what this meant. About 15 minutes later, he approached. Derek trailed behind him like moral support or backup, I couldn't tell which. Elena. Marcus's voice was tight, controlled, each syllable carefully measured. What are you doing here? I turned to face him, keeping my expression calm and neutral. Hi Marcus. I'm here with Ethan. His eyes flicked to Ethan standing beside me, then scanned the room until they landed on James talking with a group of executives near the far wall. I watched him do the math in real time, watched recognition dawn and then horror. You're dating James's son, he said flatly. Not a question. A statement of fact he was still trying to process. That's generally what I'm here with Ethan implies, I said evenly. Ethan glanced between us, clearly picking up on tension but not understanding its source. Do you two know each other? Marcus answered before I could, his tone carrying an edge of accusation. We used to date. Until about 2 months ago. The implication was clear. This couldn't possibly be coincidence. Oh, Ethan said, surprised but not bothered. Small world. Marcus's expression hardened, his jaw clenching visibly. Interesting timing. How exactly did you two meet? Ethan explained easily, no defensiveness in his tone. Film workshop at the Downtown Arts Center. Elena's a brilliant designer. We got talking about visual storytelling during a break. Turns out we have a lot in common. Started seeing each other about a month after that. I could see Marcus processing the timeline, calculating dates, realizing I'd met Ethan shortly after our breakup. That I'd moved on quickly. That I was now dating the son of his VP of operations, someone with direct influence over his career trajectory and advancement opportunities. Derek shifted uncomfortably, muttered something about this being awkward as hell. Not really, I said coolly, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. Marcus and I ended things. I met Ethan afterward. It's pretty straightforward. Technically true, though the implication was deliberate misdirection. I had met Ethan after the party comment, and I hadn't pursued anything until after ending our relationship. But Marcus could see something else in my expression, some flicker of recognition that this wasn't entirely the organic coincidence I was presenting it as. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. His hands clenched at his sides. For a moment I thought he might say something reckless, might accuse me outright of manipulation or strategic planning. But we were standing in his workplace, surrounded by colleagues and superiors, and he was smart enough to recognize that making a scene would damage him far more than it would damage me. I need some air, he said abruptly, voice strained. He turned and walked away quickly, Derek following like a confused shadow. Ethan looked at me with mild concern. That was intense. You okay? I nodded, surprised by how calm I felt. Yeah. Ex-relationships are always weird when you run into them unexpectedly. Do you want to leave? We don't have to stay if this is uncomfortable for you. No, I said, squeezing his hand. I'm fine. Really. And I was standing there in that ballroom wearing a dress I'd chosen specifically for this moment, with a man who genuinely valued me beside me. I felt more powerful than I had in years. Not because I'd orchestrated some elaborate revenge scheme, but because I'd simply refused to stay small. Refused to accept Marcus's narrative about my worth. We stayed for another 2 hours. James continued introducing us to people. Ethan and I talked with his filmmaker friends who'd also been invited. I collected several business cards from people genuinely interested in working with me. And across the room, I occasionally caught glimpses of Marcus watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger certainly. But underneath that, something else. Recognition maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that his casual cruelty had consequences he'd never anticipated. When we finally left around 10:30, Ethan opened the car door for me. That was actually more fun than I expected. Usually these things are unbearable. I had a good time, I said honestly. As we drove through the city streets, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph exactly, but closure. The confrontation I'd been dreading had happened, and I'd handled it with grace and dignity. No drama, no scene, no desperate need to explain or justify. Just the quiet power of moving forward and living well. Monday morning, I was working on a book cover design when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't typically answer calls from numbers I don't recognize, but something made me pick up. Elena. A woman's voice, professional and measured. This is Karen Mills from Human Resources at Meridian Solutions. I'm calling regarding an incident at our spring gala this past Saturday. My stomach dropped. I set down my stylus and closed my eyes briefly. Okay. We received a complaint from Marcus Hawthorne. Karen's tone remained professional, but I detected a thread of something else underneath. Skepticism, maybe. He's alleging that you attended the event specifically to harass him, and that your relationship with Ethan Brennan constitutes a conflict of interest and potential manipulation of company leadership. I wanted to get your perspective before we proceed with any formal investigation. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm and factual. I attended the event as Ethan Brennan's girlfriend, at his invitation and at the invitation of his father, James Brennan. Marcus and I dated previously and ended our relationship approximately 10 weeks ago. I had no contact with Marcus at the event. He approached me. Ethan and I met at a public film workshop several weeks after my breakup with Marcus. I wasn't aware Marcus worked at Meridian until I saw him at the gala. I'm not a company employee, so I'm honestly not sure what conflict of interest Marcus is alleging. Karen asked several follow-up questions. When exactly had Ethan and I met? Had I known Ethan was James Brennan's son when we started dating? What was the nature of my relationship with Marcus and why had it ended? Had there been any contact between Marcus and me since the breakup? I answered each question honestly, or at least technically honestly. Yes, I'd known Ethan was James's son. No, I hadn't known James worked at Meridian specifically. Yes, Marcus had texted me repeatedly after our breakup, but I'd kept responses brief and eventually he'd stopped. No, I hadn't approached Marcus at the event. Would you be willing to provide documentation of your relationship timeline with Ethan? Karen asked. Text messages, photos, social media posts. Anything that establishes when you began dating? Absolutely, I said. I can send everything over today. I spent Monday afternoon compiling evidence. Initial text exchanges with Ethan showing dates and timestamps. Photos from our coffee dates, hikes, gallery visits. All with metadata intact. Social media posts we'd both made announcing our relationship. Everything presented a clean, consistent timeline. Workshop meeting in early February, coffee and dinners throughout February. Officially dating by early March, attending the gala together in mid-April. Nothing suggested manipulation or strategic planning. Just two people meeting organically and building a relationship. I forwarded everything to Karen with a brief, professional email reiterating the facts. I'd attended as Ethan's girlfriend at his father's invitation, had no involvement in company matters, and found Marcus's complaint both surprising and unfounded. Then I waited. Tuesday afternoon, Karen called again. Thank you for the documentation, she said. The timeline is very clear. However, I need to inform you that during our investigation into Marcus's complaint, some additional concerns emerged. I felt my pulse quicken. What kind of concerns? When we spoke to other employees about Marcus's claims regarding you, several people mentioned patterns in his behavior that raised flags. Particularly regarding how he interacts with colleagues, especially women and people in creative or non-traditional roles. She paused. There were also questions raised about project credit and collaboration issues that James Brennan was not previously aware of. I absorbed this information silently, unsure how to respond. Marcus Hawthorne has been placed on a performance improvement plan for issues unrelated to his complaint about you, Karen continued. His complaint against you has been formally dismissed as unfounded and retaliatory. I want to apologize that you were dragged into this. Additionally, I should mention that James Brennan was quite displeased to learn that an employee had filed what appears to be a frivolous complaint involving his son's girlfriend. I see, I managed. Again, I apologize for any stress this caused. You're not being investigated for anything, and there's no record of this complaint in any official capacity beyond its dismissal. Thank you for your cooperation and documentation. After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen for a long time, processing what had just happened. I hadn't filed any complaints about Marcus. Hadn't said anything negative about him to HR. Hadn't tried to damage his reputation or career. But his own actions, patterns of behavior his colleagues had apparently noticed and tolerated until someone started asking questions, had caught up with him. Wednesday evening, I was cooking dinner when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You planned this. You used me to get to Brennan's son. This is revenge. You destroyed my career. Marcus. Using a different phone since I'd stopped responding to his previous number. I stared at the message for several minutes, debating whether to respond at all. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to let him sit with his anger and accusations without giving him the satisfaction of engagement. But another part of me wanted him to understand, really understand, what had actually happened. I typed carefully. Marcus, I met Ethan by chance at a public workshop. I dated him because he treats me with respect and values my work. You want to believe I orchestrated this to hurt you? Go ahead. But the truth is much simpler. I refused to stay with someone who thought I should be grateful to be claimed publicly. Everything that happened after that was your choice, not mine. Filing a false complaint with HR was your choice. How your colleagues responded when HR asked about your behavior. That was a reflection of who you've been all along. I didn't destroy your career. You did that yourself. I hit send, then immediately blocked the number. Sophie came over that evening with wine and takeout. I told her everything. The HR calls, the investigation expansion, Marcus's accusatory text. She listened quietly, then asked, "Do you feel guilty?" I thought about it honestly, searching my feelings for remorse or shame. No, I said finally. I didn't file complaints about him. Didn't tell HR he was problematic. Didn't try to damage his career. I just attended an event with my boyfriend. The fact that his own behavior caught up with him when people started asking questions, that's not my responsibility. Good, Sophie said firmly. Because you didn't do anything wrong. You moved on with your life. He's the one who tried to weaponize HR against you, and it backfired because his own colleagues confirmed he was the problem. He was right. But part of me still felt unsettled by how completely things had unraveled for Marcus. 2 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus had left Meridian Solutions. Apparently, the performance improvement plan hadn't gone well. The HR investigation had uncovered more than just his behavior toward me. Patterns of taking credit for collaborative work, undermining colleagues he viewed as competition, creating hostile environments for people he deemed less ambitious or professionally legitimate. When confronted with documentation and testimony from multiple coworkers, he'd been given an ultimatum: resign or face termination for cause. He'd chosen resignation. Found another position at a smaller consulting firm, a significant step down in prestige and compensation from where he'd been at Meridian. When I heard the news, I felt complicated. Not guilty exactly, but not triumphant either. I hadn't set out to destroy Marcus's career. I just refused to accept his narrative about my worth, and everything else had been consequence cascading from his own choices and patterns. Ethan never asked if I'd known about his father's company before we met. Either he genuinely didn't suspect any strategic planning on my part, or he'd decided it didn't matter because what we'd built together was real regardless of how it had started. Our relationship continued to deepen. 6 months after we started dating, we moved in together. Found a loft space with high ceilings and great natural light, perfect for both my design work and his film editing. We set up our workstations on opposite sides of the main room, creating a shared creative space where we could work in comfortable parallel focus. His parents continued to welcome me warmly at family dinners. My parents adored him when they finally met him over a weekend visit. Sophie pronounced him the best thing that ever happened to you, after watching us together for an evening. And slowly Marcus became just someone I used to know. Someone who taught me an important lesson about self-respect and boundaries, but who no longer occupied any significant space in my thoughts or emotions. The anger I'd carried after that winter gala had transformed into something else entirely. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of peaceful indifference. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. And we'd both ended up exactly where those choices had led us. I'd chosen to value myself. To refuse to stay small. To build something real with someone who saw me as an equal. And Marcus had chosen to file a retaliatory complaint rather than reflecting on his own behavior. And that choice had exposed patterns that ultimately cost him everything he'd spent years building. Sometimes justice isn't something you orchestrate. Sometimes it's just natural consequence catching up with someone who never learned to treat people with basic dignity and respect. 8 months into our relationship, Ethan and I had built something I didn't know was possible. A partnership where neither person felt like they were performing or compromising fundamental parts of themselves. Our loft had become genuinely shared space. My design workstation occupied the area near the large windows where natural light flooded in during morning hours, perfect for color-accurate work. Ethan's film editing setup filled the opposite corner, complete with soundproofing panels he'd installed himself and a collection of hard drives containing years of footage and projects. Between our workstations we'd built a shared library, art books, film theory texts, design monographs, documentary studies, volumes we'd trade back and forth, leaving sticky notes with observations or recommendations. The walls gradually filled with evidence of our creative lives. My framed illustrations alongside his documentary photographs. A poster from a film festival where his work had screened next to a book cover I'd designed that had won an industry award. Evidence that we'd built something together without either of us disappearing into the other's world. We fell into rhythms that felt organic rather than negotiated. Weekend mornings working in parallel silence. The only sounds are keyboard clicks and occasional frustrated sighs when something wasn't working. Afternoons exploring the city for creative inspiration. Him scouting potential filming locations, me photographing architectural details and color palettes. Evenings cooking together while discussing our respective projects, offering feedback and encouragement without trying to fix problems that weren't ours to solve. He understood when I hit deadline pressure and went nearly silent for days buried in work. I understood when he disappeared into editing caves for documentary projects, emerging exhausted and emotionally drained from spending hours with footage of real people's stories. Neither of us took these absences personally because we both recognized them as part of creative work we genuinely cared about. His filmmaker friends became my friends. They'd invite me to rough-cut screenings and actually want my perspective on visual composition and pacing. My designer colleagues started including Ethan in gallery openings and creative meetups, valuing his thoughts on narrative structure and visual storytelling. We built community together instead of forcing each other to abandon existing worlds or choose between different parts of ourselves. One evening, I was working on cover concepts for a mystery series, dark, moody imagery with careful attention to typography, while Ethan edited footage from his bookstore documentary across the room. The comfortable silence was broken by his voice. "You know what I love about us?" he said without looking up from his timeline. "We both understand that creating meaningful work matters more than impressing people." I smiled, saved my work, looked over at him. "That's a pretty low bar when you think about it." "You'd be surprised," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Most people I've dated wanted me to be more ambitious. Make commercial work that pays better. Stop wasting time on documentaries nobody watches." "Their loss," I said simply. And it was. But even as I'd built this genuinely good thing with Ethan, I occasionally found myself thinking about Marcus. Not obsessively or frequently, but in quiet moments when my mind wandered. I'd remember that moment at the Winter Gala. His casual cruelty delivered with a warm smile, his friend's agreeable laughter, my frozen polite expression while something inside me went cold and calculating. And I'd wonder if I'd crossed some ethical line. If pursuing Ethan while knowing about his father's company constituted manipulation. If I'd used a good person as a weapon in a personal vendetta. Sophie and I talked about it over coffee one Saturday morning at our usual spot. We'd been meeting there for years, long enough that the barista knew our orders before we reached the counter. "Do you regret how things played out?" she asked carefully, stirring her latte. I considered the question honestly, searching my feelings for genuine remorse. I don't regret ending things with Marcus or dating Ethan. I don't regret attending that company event. What I wonder about is whether I would have been attracted to Ethan if he hadn't been connected to Marcus's world. Like, did I choose him for the right reasons or the wrong ones? Sophie was quiet for a moment. "But you were attracted to him before you knew whose son he was, right? At the workshop before you'd done any research." I thought back to that first conversation at the coffee station. The genuine connection over shared creative interests. The ease of talking to someone who understood that design and film were solving similar problems through different mediums. Yeah, I admitted. The attraction was real from the start. Then you didn't use him, Sophie said firmly. You met someone you connected with, and the fact that dating him also positioned you to face your ex from a place of strength. That's just fortunate timing. Or poetic justice. Or maybe both. But I did register for that workshop knowing he'd be there, I pressed. That was deliberate. Yes. You engineered the meeting. But you couldn't engineer the chemistry or the relationship that followed. That was real. And honestly, she leaned forward. I think you're allowed to both genuinely love someone and appreciate the poetic justice of the situation. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. 3 months after I'd heard about Marcus's resignation, Ethan and I drove outside the city for a hiking trip. We'd found a trail that wound through dense forest with occasional overlooks offering views of the valley below. The October air was crisp, leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. We'd been hiking in comfortable silence for about an hour when Ethan asked, seemingly out of nowhere, "Did you know about my dad's company when we met?" My heart rate spiked immediately, but I kept my voice steady. I knew your dad worked in corporate consulting. I didn't know specifically where until later. Technical truth. I'd known James worked at Meridian before meeting Ethan, but the phrasing allowed ambiguity about timing. Did it matter to you that your ex worked there? He pressed, not accusatory but genuinely curious. I stopped walking, turned to face him directly. He deserved honesty even if not complete transparency. Honestly, at first maybe a little. I'd just gotten out of a relationship where I felt constantly diminished. Meeting someone who valued creative work and treated me as an equal. That mattered more to me than any connection to my ex's world. Did I think about the fact that attending that company event might make Marcus uncomfortable? Yes. Did I date you to get revenge? No. I dated you because you're kind and thoughtful and you see me as a partner rather than a project to manage. He studied my face for several long seconds. I held his gaze, letting him see whatever he needed to see. I believe you, he said finally. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you were there that night. My dad said you handled an awkward situation with a lot of grace. We kept hiking and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not because I'd confessed. I hadn't, not really, but because he'd asked and accepted my answer without drama or ultimatums or accusations. A year after breaking up with Marcus, I ran into Derek at a coffee shop downtown. I was waiting for my order when I heard someone say my name. I turned to find him standing there looking uncomfortable, holding his own coffee cup. Elena, right? From the company events. I nodded, bracing for awkwardness or hostility. He shifted his weight, clearly struggling with what to say. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about that winter gala. What Marcus said about you being grateful he claimed you publicly. That was really inappropriate. I didn't fully realize it at the time, but after everything came out during the HR investigation, I started thinking differently about a lot of things. About how we talked about people, how we measured worth. I'm sorry, I laughed. The apology surprised me. Thank you for saying that. It means something. For what it's worth, he continued, I think Marcus is doing okay now. He's at a different company, seems more humble. Maybe losing everything was the wake-up call he needed. I nodded politely, but internally I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. No lingering anger or desire to know more about how Marcus was doing. He'd become completely irrelevant to my life. Just someone I used to know who'd taught me an important lesson about self-respect and boundaries. That evening, Ethan and I were working in our usual configuration. Me on cover designs, him on documentary edits. When I broke the silence. I think I finally understand something. He looked up from his editing timeline. What's that? Revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to let them define you. I didn't destroy Marcus. I just refused to accept his version of my worth. Everything else was just consequences of his own choices catching up with him. Ethan smiled, that warm expression I'd grown to love. That's a much healthier perspective than I expected from someone who definitely orchestrated being at that company event. I laughed despite myself. I never said I orchestrated it. I said I attended my boyfriend's father's work party. Right, he said, grinning. Total coincidence. Exactly. Total coincidence. We returned to our work and I realized something profound. Marcus's downfall had been satisfying in the moment. Watching him process the implications of seeing me there with Ethan, hearing about the HR investigation and his eventual resignation. But that satisfaction had been temporary and ultimately hollow. What actually healed was building a life where I felt valued, respected, and genuinely happy. Where my work was celebrated rather than tolerated. Where I could exist fully as myself without apology or performance. The best revenge hadn't been strategic planning or calculated confrontation. It had been simply choosing better and refusing to stay small. Marcus destroyed himself through his own patterns and choices. I just happened to be present when those consequences finally caught up with him. And now, a year later, I barely thought about him at all. He'd become a footnote in my story rather than a defining chapter. A cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake someone's patience for permission to disrespect them. I glanced across the loft at Ethan, focused intently on his editing, and felt genuine gratitude. Not for revenge or justice or vindication, but for the simple profound gift of being seen and valued exactly as I was. That, I'd learned, was worth infinitely more than any calculated payback could ever be. If this story of quiet power and strategic justice kept you hooked until the very end, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Elena walked into that spring gala on Ethan's arm, and Marcus realized exactly what he'd lost. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Want more stories about people who refused to stay small and chose themselves instead? Subscribe and hit that notification bell.